traders and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. So global stocks actually set for the longest winning streak this year on bets that the Fed will signal it's ready to start cutting rates. It comes as central banks diverge on the rate path ahead of the Jackson Hole meeting. Well, let's bring in Erik Nelson, macro strategist at Wells Fargo, and Justina Lee, Bloomberg Markets reporter. So thank you both for joining us. Justina, we'll talk about gold in a second. Erik, when you look at some of the diverging paths that central banks could take, I think it's just a really difficult call whether you put inflation above growth. I know they have different mandates, but what are you expecting to hear from Jay Powell?
I think it'll be a relatively dovish message, right? I think the key message that we'll get is expanding upon what we heard from the July statement, which was the risks around the mandate are becoming more balanced, more shifting toward sort of unemployment rather than inflation. And so I think we'll probably kind of focus on that message. The question for me is we have a very dovish expectation already. We're looking for markets pricing in almost 100 basis points of rate cuts by the end of this year. Can he really meet that high dovish bar? That's what I sort of worry about, and I think it'll be difficult to do that. Yeah,
and again, just in terms of character, Jay Powell doesn't usually say too much, right? He's extremely cautious because things shift quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, to use that word from TikTok, he's pretty demure, right? And I think that, it's at an interesting point because kind of as Erik mentioned, I mean, markets are expecting 100 basis points of rate cuts this year. But I think Jay Powell will be especially careful this time, especially given that there's still one more set of CPI and one more set of jobs number ahead of us. And if we look at the mixed signals that we've gotten from U.S. economic data so far, I mean, it definitely doesn't look like we're heading for a very imminent, sharp slowdown. So I think the case for 50 basis points would just be to sort of like act in advance and maybe kind of have some room to pause there. But I think it's kind of hard to see what would justify a 50 basis point cut in September at this point.
And Erik, what are you expecting? Again, I guess if you look at history, once the Fed starts in a cutting cycle, like a lot of the big central banks, and they continue cutting gradually or maybe with bigger cuts, but they continue. Could we be one and done or one and done for this year?
I think we're the labor market's weak enough where I'd be surprised to see a one and done. I think if they're going 25 basis points, I'd expect to see a couple, at least 3 or 4 meetings in a row. If it's 50, it'd be very hard to see 50 and done. Probably they go 50 twice because the labor market is very weak, and you see unemployment rate rise another 3 percentage points. But I think given how weak the labor market is, we're looking at a string of cuts here.
Yeah, and so that's moving gold.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting because we've seen gold rally all year, even as yields kind of surged. And now that yields are falling, I mean, it's kind of going back to that fundamental relationship where when yields fall, gold tends to rally. And so I think it's kind of interesting because it speaks to that sort of fundamental support. But at the same time, I mean, all year long, we've been talking about central bank buying, maybe kind of a lot of people buying as a sort of portfolio hedge. And now you kind of have all these forces sort of converging here, which is pushing gold to the record high.
So, Erik, I mean, when you look at, I know you're a macro strategist, when you look at how the market's behaved in the last 2 weeks, I mean, it's incredible that, it feels like a distant memory, but I remember that Monday morning was really quite a sell-off, and Justina was with me, and it was kind of like we're all wide-eyed and saying what happens next. I mean, what do you take away from that period? Was it just a volatile August? Was it an unwinding on a carry trade that's been undone, or is it actually markets behaved as they should have? So that's a relief after the 3 years we've had.
I think it was a very technical sell-off. What really makes me think that is credit really did not budge all that much. Yes, spreads widened, but volatility overall in the sector, the sort of conversations we had with investors and sort of the market participants, there was not real recession concern. I know that was the big headline after the jobs report, but looking at growth forecasts, looking at the behavior of credit, all that told me that there wasn't real true panic. And there was some carry trade unwind, there was some technical unwinds in other sectors, and look, there's not really recession fears out there from people I talk to. And if that changes, that could be a real paradigm shift for everything, frankly.
Are we underestimating the, lull that we're seeing in China? So we're just getting a breaking news headline, Justina, China weighing letting local governments issue bonds to buy homes. I mean, this is weaker. This is kind of, their Achilles heel, and it's not getting any better.
Yeah, I think the big question in China here, is we're probably going to get some slowdown in global demand. And so their export engine is unlikely to be able to support that growth target any longer. And so I think we're waiting for these big moves to support consumption. And I think the one you mentioned is probably just one of them. But are we going to see more decisive moves in a kind of policy where China has always been pretty reluctant to really push it? And I think that's sort of the big question here.
Erik, your thoughts on China? And again, I appreciate the fact that there are not many people talking about recession, but expectations of the U.S. economy are moving quite a lot. It's like a roller coaster.
It's true. And given looking at growth forecasts for the U.S., how they've evolved over the course of the year, they've generally gone one way, which is up. Yeah. Right. So there is a lot of still optimism, lingering optimism around the U.S. economy. The problem is the U.S. economy is weakening. It's not reflected in the forecasts or, I think, the general market. And China remains very weak. Now, these are the two sort of key engines for the global economy. Neither one looks particularly strong at the moment. And that, to me, is an issue for global growth. And I think is a risk that's underappreciated by the market right now.
What happens with the Bank of Japan? That's the other, I guess, big risk. I don't know whether they change in their communication or what they've learned from the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, one interesting thing is I think there were headlines this morning saying that they just released these research papers indicating there could still be rate hikes coming this year. Well, I think that if that's the case, the lesson they've learned from this episode is they need to pay a lot of attention to market sentiment, even if it's kind of beyond their control and it's not their fault and all that. But I think at least they should be in a slightly better position now that a lot of the leverage has presumably been flushed out of that yen carry trade.
Erik, is the BOJ almost more market moving than Jay Powell's speech on Friday?
Well, I'm not sure. I think the BOJ, look, while they have been more hawkish of late, they're not moving at every meeting and they're not moving, with particular urgency, right? So I think there's much more focus on Powell here. You could see a little bit of movement in, say, the pricing for the next couple BOJ meetings, but is that going to be a big macro mover? I'm less convinced.
All right, thank you both. Erik Nelson there, macro strategist at Wells Fargo, and our markets reporter, Justina Lee, both stay with us. Now, Italian rescuers are searching for those still missing after a luxury yacht sank off the coast of Sicily yesterday. The Italian news agency ANSA says Morgan Stanley International chairman Jonathan Bloomer is also among those unaccounted for, along with British tech tycoon Mike Lynch. Let's get more with Olivia Solon, Bloomberg's technology editor. Olivia, thank you for joining us. So what do we know actually happened to the yacht? How did it sink?
So it was the early hours of yesterday morning when there was a very violent storm and the boat sank. We know that it was a sailing yacht. It has a very big mast. We're not exactly sure how it sunk, but that mast would have made it, move around in the wind a lot. And we do know that local fishermen were staying in port that night because of the weather.
So who do we know was actually on board and who's unaccounted for?
So we know there were 22 people on board in total, 12 guests and 10 crew. We've been trying to confirm the people who remain missing. We know that Mike Lynch is missing, his 18-year-old daughter Hannah, Chris Morvillo, who is one of his lawyers in his recent fraud case from Clifford Chance, Nada, Morvillo's wife, Jonathan Bloomer, the Morgan Stanley International Bank chairman, and Jonathan's wife Judy are those missing. One person has been confirmed dead and the other 15 have been rescued.
So what do we know is the latest with the search and rescue effort?
The search and rescue effort is ongoing, but we're hearing from local reports that it's becoming less and less likely that any survivors are going to be found. The UK government's Marine Accident Investigation Branch has sent out 4 inspectors to go and help the search and investigate what took place.
Olivia, I know it's early days, but it just seems incredible because they were so close to the shore. Was this just a freak storm?
It was a very violent storm. It's not super uncommon, but it was a very violent storm and a sailing yacht with a very big mast, which potentially made it more unsteady in the water.
Olivia, thank you so much. Olivia Solon there, Bloomberg's technology editor. Now, coming up, more on what to expect as central bankers gather at the Fed's Jackson Hole Symposium. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
This week, Balance of Power is live in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention.
So we've got a race here, and the sprint begins.
We'll bring you breaking developments.
Vice President Kamala Harris closing the gap with Donald Trump.
And informative analysis, all leading up to special coverage Thursday evening, including Vice President Harris's acceptance speech as the Democratic nominee for president.
As president, I will show Donald Trump what real leadership looks like.
Tune in all week on Bloomberg Television.
The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, still with us to talk about markets, Erik Nelson, macro strategist at Wells Fargo, and our markets reporter, Justina Lee. So thank you both for staying with us. Erik, we were talking before about the BOJ and actually what we saw over the last 2 weeks. How much of the carry trade is still to be unwound? I mean, there were kind of bets were unwound and then they were put back on.
Yeah, I think quite a bit. I mean, just looking purely at the yen and looking at positioning in futures, 65% of that's been unwound. That doesn't mean dollar yen can't go lower, right? And I think the next phase of that dollar yen downside has to come from hard landing risks, right? Recession risks. Like I mentioned earlier, this is really not priced into the market, and that can really unlock us back to 140 or lower. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think what you've seen in the last couple days has been a lot of focus on value. So the yen's performed, the renminbi's performed, but also Norwegian krone, some of these very cheap currencies. And you've seen a lot of flows back into emerging markets. And that right now is not so much about the carry trade as much as it is some of those unloved EM currencies. It's not the high carry Mex peso, it's other currencies.
But Erik, so the Bank of Japan also released a pair of research papers highlighting the persistence of this inflationary pressure. So again, is there still a case to be made for another hike soon?
I think so. I think they can go again in October. I think it's probably going to be a 25 basis point move. But, of course, this is very contingent upon market volatility. That was the message from Uchida a couple weeks ago. We know that if dollar yen is falling like a knife, like it was a couple weeks ago, the BOJ is not going to hike rates. It needs to be a calm environment. The Fed probably was moving in 25 basis point increments, not 50 in that scenario. So it's not necessarily going to be this unbelievable support for the yen in that environment.
We also know that the divergence of views on BOJ policy, of course, has been emerging among some of the candidates to become prime minister in Japan. So what's your take on what are you looking for in Japan and yen?
Yeah, I think that really is a big question here. And I think, the dollar is a big factor here because a lot of people have been pointing out that if you look at a lot of the fundamental measures, the dollar kind of still remains overvalued. Of course, some of that is because of dollar asset buying. But are we still going to see a move there? And also, what's going to happen to head of Japanese inflation, right? I mean, as the research papers pointed out, they're still looking pretty sticky. And that is the picture that we've been seeing globally.
Bank of England, it's not dull, but actually the UK economy has been doing okay.
Yeah, it's been doing pretty well, I'd say. Maybe one of the better performers in the G10. And, there's a lot of negativity towards sterling and the economy. That's shifted. I think in FX space, there is a lot of long positioning in sterling already. The BOE is priced for much fewer cuts than peers, which I think is fair. UK inflation is strong, growth is strong. We'll hear from Bailey this week. I'm very curious to see that, right? He tends to be more dovish than the rest of the committee. I think that's a risk here short term for sterling. But at the end of the day, it comes down to data. And I think sterling, you probably need to see the inflation environment shift for sterling weakness to come through, and we're just not there yet.
But, Erik, was there a shift in, it struck me in the Bank of England press conference last time that they seem to have dismissed some of the pressures that come from, persistent inflation because of geopolitics or high oil prices. Is that a mistake?
Well, I think they've been very quick to dismiss a lot of kind of strength in inflation and wage. So there's been a lot of, I think, that brushing aside. I think that it's fair for them to continue to maybe start cutting rates, right? Chief Economist Pill has made this point that even if they cut rates, they're still in restrictive territory given where headline inflation is. Real wages are very strong. I think it makes sense to kind of take some of that top-level restriction off. But, it's going to be a slow process, right? They barely voted for a cut. It was 5-4 vote. They're probably moving every other meeting, not every meeting.
What's your I mean, it's one of the most interesting, actually, central banks, but they've also been lucky because it's gone their way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny because we kind of did see this big split across the ECB at the last meeting. And I think a lot of central banks are kind of grappling at this stage with a lot of the sort of contradictory forces, right? I mean, if we think of what the ECB is facing, for instance, I mean, inflation has kind of picked up a little bit in July, but at the same time, we've seen a bit of a growth slowdown. And I think in both the UK and Europe, kind of on a more structural basis, they're also thinking about, productivity growth, right? Why is this so much slower? Because that, even though it's kind of hard for the central bank to solve on its own, I mean, that has a big impact on kind of the dynamics between, economic growth and kind of inflation there.
And Erik, I guess one of the pressures comes from wages. How's that dynamic going to go into next year?
Yeah, we'll get the wage numbers later this week from Europe, and I think the reality is, the underlying wage picture in Europe has been soft. You've seen corporate profitability has definitely taken a hit, so it's pretty hard to maintain those higher paychecks. I think that's kind of the risk of the cycle that we're looking at here is, corporate profitability continuing to deteriorate. That could hit the labor market, but that to me is more of a 25 story, and we're really just not at that point yet.
All right. Thank you both for joining us. Erik Nelson there from Wells Fargo and Bloomberg's Justina Lee. Coming up, Antony Blinken says Israel has accepted a ceasefire proposal and Hamas must now do the same. We'll have more on the U.S. Secretary of State's visit to the Middle East next. And this is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is a Pulse, and I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Israel's military has recovered the bodies of 6 male hostages who had been held in the Gaza Strip. It comes as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Egypt from Israel as he attempts to finalize a ceasefire deal. Now, for more on this, let's bring in Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar. Abir, what's the latest on the Israeli military operations to recover the bodies?
Good morning, Francine. So we just reported this. This is an overnight military operation where Israel just announced that they have recovered the bodies of 6 male hostages from Khan Yunis in northern Gaza. One of them is a 79-year-old who is thought to have been killed during captivity by Hamas. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, came out in a statement and said that Israel is going to make every effort to bring back the remaining hostages, whether dead or alive. Now, we know that out of the remaining hostages in Gaza, 40 are believed to be dead. But the efforts continue. As you mentioned, Antony Blinken is heading to Egypt today after he was in Israel, where he had conversations with Netanyahu to sort of reach the ceasefire deal.
Abir, Blinken has just arrived also in Egypt. What's the status of these ceasefire talks?
So, we heard yesterday that on Sunday, when he was in Israel and met with the prime minister, that Israel has agreed to a ceasefire deal. But what remains now is the acceptance of Hamas. So what we're waiting for right now is to, for Hamas leaders to come back and say whether they accept the terms or not. We know that Hamas leaders did not participate in the last round of ceasefire talks that happened in Doha. We're not fully aware of the details about whether they'll be present in Egypt or not. But what we're waiting for essentially is to hear back from Hamas leaders on whether the deals that were called by Blinken a bridging agreement are going to get reached in Egypt by the end of this week or not.
Abir, thank you so much for the important update. Abir Abu Omar there. Now, this is a picture for markets, but also in the last 20 minutes or so, we found out that China is actually considering a new funding option for local governments to buy some of the unsold homes. This comes after there was a series of rescue packages that failed to prop up the market, and that's according to people familiar with the matter. All eyes on Jackson Hole, all eyes on what we could hear from Jay Powell on Friday. You can see European stocks gaining 0.2%. Coming up, defending his legacy, President Biden gives a passionate speech about his time in the White House. We'll have the latest from the Democrats' convention in Chicago. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. Global stocks are headed for their longest winning streak for the year, with investors betting the Fed will soon signal it's ready to cut rates. U.S. President Joe Biden delivered an emotional and bittersweet call for Democrats to rally behind Kamala Harris at his party's national convention in Chicago. Plus, Israel has recovered the bodies of 6 male hostages who had been held up in the Gaza Strip. It comes as the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken heads to Egypt as he presses for a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. So let's go back to politics and focus on day one of the Democratic National Convention, where outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden has defended his time in office. Now, in a passionate speech, he underlined the credentials of Kamala Harris to be his successor at the White House.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career. But she'll be a president our children can look up to. She'll be a president respected by world leaders because she already is. She'll be a president we can all be proud of. And she will be a historic president who puts her stamp on America's future.
Well, for more on all of this, let's bring in Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn, who's been following this very closely for us and who's in Washington, D.C. Vonnie, I mean, it's a very difficult, balancing act. It's basically he wants to show that he's still in charge of Biden whilst passing the baton. So did he put this balance right?
He put to bed the emotional part of the speech quite early on, Francine. Right before he came on, we had a cavalcade of speakers that all became quite emotional. Chris Coons, for example, of Delaware, Joe Biden's home state, turning the "Let's Go Joe" into "We Love Joe," and that was a real moment in the hall where you could see that many of the almost 5,000 delegates were quite teary, and you saw Joe Biden walking up to the podium, hugging his daughter Ashley, who had introduced him, following Dr. Jill Biden, and as we see, wiping a tear from his eye, right? But he got up at the podium and he made sure to go into campaign mode, essentially. Very evocative language, talking about Charlottesville and the horror that happened there, and that being what made him want to run in the first place, to then listing essentially the achievements of his administration and tying Kamala Harris to each of those achievements. He said the legislation we passed delivered more to red states than blue. And when I say we, I mean Kamala and me. And he also talked about more Americans having health insurance, the smallest racial wealth gap in 20 years being created, and beating Big Pharma. And he said, guess who cast the tie-breaking vote? VP, soon-to-be President Kamala Harris. So really putting her up there in all of the achievements as a member of his team. He also, of course, tried to get ahead of some of the frailties that are perceived to be among her frailties, including the border issue. And obviously we're going to see Donald Trump on the Arizona-Mexico border on Thursday to try and draw some oxygen from that. He said that Trump had actually killed the strongest bipartisan border bill ever in the United States. And we know that Kamala is trying to bring that back. And there was a funny moment as well. You'll remember Infrastructure Week. He said that, Donald Trump had promised Infrastructure Week every week, whereas his administration had basically delivered an infrastructure decade.
Yeah, it'll be interesting actually to see what lands out of all of that. And Vonnie, we hear from the Obamas a little bit later today. The party will also hold a ceremonial roll call, and we're expecting a lot of influencers to show up today. What are you most looking forward to?
Yes, that roll call, it's being deemed now a celebratory roll call because, of course, they already had the virtual roll call, if you'll remember. And so all of this is celebratory. It's the first time that these delegates have been in person since pre-coronavirus. So 8 years since there has been an in-person DNC. And the momentum does seem to be continuing. There was a lot of emotion in the hall. The protesters outside, of course, are there as well. And the influencers, as you say, Francine, 200 of them, and many of them took to the stage tonight. This is still Monday night, my time, but to basically address the DNC. We've never seen that before. They got privileges, they got stage time, and they're tweeting and influencing, I guess is the term for it, as we speak. And obviously this is directly to the youth vote. It's a demographic that Kamala Harris desperately needs to get on her side. That and some other voters who have been perhaps turning slightly more red, including black male voters. We saw, almost 1 in 5 in swing states say that they were actually going to vote for Donald Trump this time around. Now, that's up from 8%, which is a huge increase, although it's still only 1 in 5. But the Harris campaign obviously is going to want to bring some of them back into that stall.
Vonnie, very quickly, and we were talking about this yesterday, actually, that on the Republican side, the Trump camp may be also trying out new tactics, less personal attacks, more policy. I mean, you mentioned there the youth vote. Are there any other either, demographics or people that the Biden or the Harris camp has to go for?
Definitely just swing state voters right now, right, Francine? Because we are seeing a bump in the polls for Harris. She has made up the Biden deficit. And in fact, if you take an average of polls, she is slightly ahead within the margin of error, not statistically significant, but slightly ahead of Donald Trump in some of the really key swing states. Even Pennsylvania is up for grabs right now, and we are still 10 weeks out. So the campaign does still have to make inroads into these states. Donald Trump, as you mentioned, has been traveling these swing states. This was not something that was on his agenda. It is now. He will be in Michigan tomorrow. He was in Pennsylvania today. And he's talking freely to everybody, including Bloomberg News. He was talking about the Federal Reserve and what he might do there. And when asked about housing, given Kamala Harris's promise to deliver $25,000 of a subsidy to those who are looking to get on the housing ladder, he said, well, we might do something about that as well. So it appears that everything is on the table for Donald Trump, as long as it pertains to something to do with Kamala Harris's policies. And we'll see more definitely to come during this week.
Vonnie, thank you so much. Vonnie Quinn there in Washington, joining us on the very latest, of course, of U.S. politics. Now, well, for more on this, Sarah Bufkin, who's assistant professor in political theory at the University of Birmingham, joins us. Professor, thank you for joining us. I mean, there's a lot going on, and I don't know whether, President Biden struck the right tone. I know it was a lot about his legacy, but should he be out there just trying to get votes instead of kind of also reflect on his time in power?
I think the Democratic Party really saw the ways in which they needed to give Biden his final moment on the stage. I mean, when he received the presidential candidacy nomination in 2020, he did it during COVID. He didn't have the huge audience. He didn't have the balloons dropping from the ceiling after his speech with everyone roaring. And he's pursued this office for 40 years of his career. I mean, he's really dedicated his life to holding the office he now does. And I think that they knew that on the Monday of the convention, when they kind of wanted to signal the passing of the baton, they needed to give Biden both the ceremonial applause that his time in politics is due, and to let him celebrate the achievements of his administration. So I think much more of the case for a Kamala Harris presidency will be made starting today.
I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasm, right? Especially some of this grassroots enthusiasm with the Harris-Walz ticket. Can they keep it going until November 5th?
Yeah, I mean, that'll be the real question. I mean, what we've already seen so far is that there's been, many of the policies that the Biden team was running on, Kamala Harris's team is now running on. So there hasn't been a huge shift in the policy, but there's been a big shift in the messaging, and in particular the affect, the kind of collective emotional energy that is being mobilized here. And so where Biden really ran on a kind of affective fear, right, that we have to defend democracy, that we have to look at January 6th and say never again can we let something like this happen. Kamala Harris has taken a lesson from Barack Obama in 2008 and is running less out of fear and from a defensive posture and more from joy and a sense of hope about the future. And I think that's really been picked up by the grassroots. Democrats are ready to be excited about someone again, to not be in a defensive crouch against Trump, but to really put forward their own positive vision for what an economy that works for everyone could look like.
And so how does that play in the polls? And also her pick for vice president, Tim Walz, seems to be doing really well in the polls.
It does. And I think already, it's, the news cycles pass so fast in politics, but so far Tim Walz is playing much better as a VP pick than J.D. Vance is. And I think in many respects, it seems like Kamala Harris in part made the decision based on personal rapport between her and Tim Walz, but he is very much an attempt to reach out to rural and suburban voters, particularly in those Midwestern swing states. He's the governor of Minnesota. He's very well known in Wisconsin. And he speaks to a lot of the communities that, because of his personal narrative, his background, and his policies and his style of speech, that Kamala Harris needs to win.
But can he win Pennsylvania for her?
We'll see. They're campaigning and they're going for the rural areas, right? I think that it's a much more aggressive campaign footprint than you saw under the Biden administration. The on-the-ground game has really been amped up, and that's part of what happens when you have a youthful
candidate, right, is that you can put them in a bus and send them around to gas stations and small rallies over and over and over again to get them out meeting people.
How important, so we have Tim Walz's speech on Wednesday, and then we have Kamala Harris's speech. What's the most important one? I feel like we haven't really heard from Harris in a way where we actually say this is 100% the policies that she locked down.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how much policy we are going to get from Kamala Harris on Thursday, but I do think that speech is the most important one. I mean, Tim Walz needs to introduce himself to the American people. He needs to, I don't want to say bring the vibes, but he's one of the best sort of attackers of Trump and the Trump campaign. We've seen that with the ways in which he started all these memes around these guys being just weird. And I think he can bring a lot of energy and a lot of attack. And then Kamala has to get up and show herself to be the future of the Democratic Party. This is going to be her biggest stage. So,
and then there's a debate September 10th. It's unclear, actually, in my mind, who wins this, because she's a prosecutor. Trump is very good at taking people down, but he hasn't had that much time to assassinate her character.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly going to have a sterner spine in a debate, and it won't be cowed as easily. I mean, she's been through tough cross-examinations. She's done the Senate hearings, but Trump is a wild card, right? We remember him from the debates with Hillary Clinton when he just kind of stalked her around the stage and loomed over her and just cowed her with his physical presence. Hopefully that won't be something we'll see on September 10th, but it certainly seems like the field is much more open in those debates than it would be between more conventional candidates.
Are the Republicans and Donald Trump changing tactics?
I think they're trying to pivot, certainly. Whether or not Donald Trump actually follows the new playbook is always the real question. I mean, the man doesn't like to stay on script. But certainly you can see from the campaign and from their ad buys that what they're trying to do is to run the Kamala Harris of 2024 against the Kamala Harris of 2020 Democratic primary. So they're going back to the tape, the audio, where she took further leftist positions and trying to paint her as a kind of far-left lunatic or Marxist in some sorts. I mean, I'm not really sure Donald Trump knows what Marxism is. But, really trying to tar and feather with a lot of the buzzwords that Republicans are very concerned by pulling up this old footage and showing it out. So we'll see whether or not those attacks actually land. I mean, in many respects, I think that the centrists that the Republicans are trying to convince, they'll be able to hear the other side.
Is it impossible to say whether he regrets his pick of VP? And if he does, can he change it?
I mean, I don't know if he regrets his choice. I think Republicans in the party regret his choice of VP. Yeah. I mean, J.D. Vance was very much the pick of someone who felt strong, who felt like they didn't need to reach into the center at all, who was very convinced of basically his victory after the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania. Trump doesn't like to admit he's wrong. So in some respects, I think what you'll see is probably a doubling down, and I doubt that J.D. Vance will be off the ticket at this point. If anything, what you'll see is the Republican Party tries to kind of sideline him and marginalize his public presence.
A lot of the press is basically saying, because the Democrats have been so energized that, Donald Trump is getting, I guess, more desperate in his tactics. I mean, we've kind of learned not to underestimate him. So do you trust the polls? Can they change? Is it going to be extremely hard for either party to win?
I think it's a neck-and-neck race right now. I mean, what's so exciting for Democrats is the fact that Biden was running sort of about 2 to 3 points behind Trump for the last 6, 7, 8 months. And that gap has closed, but it's still very much a neck-and-neck race between Kamala Harris and Trump. There's a lot of weeks ahead of us before November 5th, and we certainly could see the polls shift in many ways. The promising news for Democrats at this stage is that normally candidates get a post-convention bump in the polls. And Trump certainly would have been expecting that, but Biden's decision to step aside and Kamala Harris's quick consolidation in the Democratic Party really removed that bump. So we'll see what happens after the Democratic National Convention. I mean, the Democrats are very much trying to show party unity and enthusiasm this week. But the debates could throw things, and honestly, on-the-ground campaigning really shouldn't be overlooked.
Sarah Bufkin, thank you so much for joining us. Assistant Professor in Political Theory at the University of Birmingham. Coming up, Volodymyr Zelenskiy urges Ukraine's allies to lift restrictions on the use of their weapons to strike inside Russia. We'll have the latest on geopolitics. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskiy has urged allies to lift restrictions on the use of their weapons to strike inside Russia. Now, it comes as Kyiv continues its two-week incursion into the Kursk region. Now, for more on all of this, let's bring in Bloomberg's Tony Halpin. Tony, thank you for joining us. So what are the latest developments in Ukraine's incursion into Russia?
Hello, Francine. Well, Volodymyr Zelenskiy was in pretty bullish mood when he was talking to Ukrainian diplomats yesterday. He said that essentially Ukrainian forces control close to 500 square miles inside Russia, that they're continuing to expand their presence there. And he was very much making the case that this vindicated his argument that Ukraine's allies should remove any restrictions on these long-range weapons, because, as he put it, the red lines that Russia kept arguing would be the response were in fact illusory, and that there was no real response from President Putin to justify caution on the part of Ukraine's allies in allowing it to use the weapons as it sees fit.
So, Tony, why is President Zelenskiy pressing allies for long-range weapons?
Well, I think it's a debate that's raging now within Europe, certainly, and probably with the US as well, that the argument has always been that they don't want to provoke an escalation from President Vladimir Putin in Russia, potentially even a nuclear response, because of crossing the perceived red lines about entering Russian territory, for example. And Zelenskiy was making the case that this was the reddest of red lines, that no one had actually crossed into Russia in close to 80 years, and that the response had been shown, in his words, to be illusory, and that therefore the concerns of Ukraine's allies aren't really justified, and that his argument that it will allow Ukraine to speed up a resolution of this war by attacking Russian airfields and military bases where they strike Ukrainian cities, that would be strengthened by the fact that he's shown these lines to be illusory.
So, but what's the likelihood of that happening, given all the concerns around it?
Well, I think there'll still be a great deal of caution among European allies, certainly, and I think in the US too. They have always argued that they need to help Ukraine defend itself. It becomes a bit more of a grey area in terms of helping Ukraine win the war, because there's arguments about what that actually means in terms of taking the fight to Vladimir Putin inside Russia.
Tony, thank you so much for the briefing. Tony Halpin there with the very latest on Ukraine and Russia. Coming up, the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, heads to Germany's new $11 billion semiconductor project. So we'll have more on the European chip story. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Bloomberg has learned that Edgar Bronfman, heir to the Seagram Spirits empire, has made a bid worth $4.3 billion to take control of Paramount Global. Now, the parent company of CBS and MTV has already accepted an offer from Skydance, led by David Ellison, the son of Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison. The agreement with Skydance includes a 45-day period during which Paramount can review other offers. And AMD shares surged in New York after the company announced it's buying server maker ZT Systems. Now, the cash and stock transaction values the deal at nearly $5 billion. ZT has extensive experience making server computers for owners of large data centers. Now, the takeover boosts AMD's efforts to challenge NVIDIA, which has been the runaway leader in the market. Now, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is visiting the site of a new $11 billion semiconductor plant in eastern Germany. The facility, which will be 70% owned by TSMC in partnership with several European chip makers. Now, let's get all of the details from Bloomberg's Oliver Kirk in Berlin. Good morning, Ollie. So how big is this project, and why did it end up in Germany?
Yeah, Francine, this is really a big deal for the Germans because they've been trying to attract a lot of these semiconductor manufacturers within Germany. And, you know, TSMC is really very different than some of the ones that they already have. So they already have Infineon, a German company. It went to one of their groundbreakings, you know, last year. But they were doing memory chips. TSMC is very attractive because it does some of the most sophisticated, most important semiconductors from across the world. So this is a 10 billion euro project. There's going to be some other stakeholders, including Infineon, Bosch, and some of the other European companies. Each of them them will hold 10%. But TSMC is really driving this. They own 70% of it. And what's interesting is of that 10 billion euros that it costs to do this, 5 billion is coming from the German government in a direct subsidy. So significant. For TSMC, it's part of its bigger plan. It's opened a fab for the first time in Japan. They're throwing a ton of money in Arizona in the United States. And this is really their first footprint ever in Europe. So significant that they've chosen Germany. And for the EU, because Ursula von der Leyen is going to be there today to sort of break ground here with them, the EU wants to do 20% of global chip production in the world. If they're going to hit that figure, or even frankly a fraction of it in the next 5 years, they need more projects like this.
So, Ali, put this in context of the global chip race. Where does Germany sit right now, and where does it want to be?
Yeah, so Francine, listen, all of the wealth that has been generated in Germany over the last 20, 30 years has been from owning industries that are basically slowly waning and are not sort of very innovative in terms of where their place in the modern world. What they want to do with this is try to attract some of those future-facing industries like the chip industry within Germany. And so they've done that. They've cultivated it in what they call Silicon Saxony in Dresden. So they've thrown a ton of money at this, 5 billion to TSMC, 10 billion to Intel, to really build that ecosystem, because they need a lot of companies building this stuff for the auto sector and industry, but they also need to attract the labor force so that you have people that can actually do these really complicated jobs here in Germany. And this is their endeavor to do that. And they're throwing billions and billions of dollars at it to try to get it to happen.
Ollie, thanks so much. Oliver Crook there with the very latest from Berlin. Now let's take a quick look at some of the events we're following today. 10 a.m. UK time, Euro area CPI data. 12 p.m. we have Turkish central bank rate decision, and that's before the U.S. market open. Lowe's earnings, and then, of course, it's the Democratic National Convention, day 2. And then we have a number of Fed speakers, including Raphael Bostic and Mr. Barr. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, Danny Berger, Manus Cranny in New York, and this is Bloomberg.